So the lunar nodes in astrology, the powerful, powerful lunar nodes, maybe some of the most underappreciated points in the Western system, particularly the older Western systems. But we see a major resurgence of their use with contemporary practitioners, and in the Vedic tradition, major focus on these lunar nodes. I want to look at the lunar nodes in this video. I want to break them down a little bit, talk about what they are and how they operate. So welcome to the channel. This is S.J. Anderson. Thanks for being here. I talk about astrology on this channel. Today I want to speak a little bit, an introduction maybe, on these lunar nodes. And the genesis of this video comes from a comment. This is from Liz A. They ask here, would love to hear more about how you view the nodes. And what a great question, because the nodes for me have become essential in understanding the transiting sky and understanding what's happening in a natal chart, what's happening according to the transits, what's being activated in a natal chart at any given time. The lunar nodes are maybe one of the top 1 or 2 or 3 things I would want to examine in someone's chart. And I do it in readings that I give. And so we have this activation, this very amazing activation of the lunar nodes. And I want to talk all about it here. I want to go to Mark Jones in his book, Healing the Soul. He says here, clearly the nodes are not real bodies. They are abstract points in space, which are representative of the arc of movement of any planet. And so we look at the lunar nodes, and he gives this really nice drawing here. You have the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun. The sun moves in a pretty uniform line through the year against the backdrop of the fixed stars. And the moon has a similar path, but it's like a sine wave. It goes above and below that path of the sun. And so you can see it here in this image. Figure 2, the nodes relative to the ecliptic. The moon sometimes is above the ecliptic, sometimes it's below. And that's why sometimes you'll see the moon right on it'll be down very close to the horizon, or sometimes it's very high in the sky, because it all depends on where the moon is relative to the ecliptic. The nodal points are the points where the moon crosses either under the ecliptic or crosses above the ecliptic. And so the nodes are the points that the sun and moon's paths cross, such that when you have a syzygy, a new moon or full moon, near those lunar nodes, because their paths are crossing, and so when they meet, or when the Earth gets in between them, a new moon or a full moon, you get eclipses. And that's another way to think about the lunar nodes. They're eclipse points. They're the points where the eclipses take place. And so right away, a major feature of how I delineate the lunar nodes is that they are areas of the sky that eclipses take place. They provide the location for eclipses. What are eclipses? And so now we can start talking about the nature of eclipses and how then we might transpose or bring into our delineation of the lunar nodes features of eclipses. And I just say this often. Think about you're working, at some point you have no idea what an eclipse is, and all of a sudden in the middle of the day, it goes black for however long, a few minutes when the eclipse goes perfect. The sun basically gets eaten and it stops and goes away, and you can see stars in the daytime. Think about the psychological shock and wildness of that phenomenon. This is what nodes do. My favorite phrase is accelerated fatedness. Things get wonky. I've used that phrase before. Things get strange. Reality changes and inverts. The other thing about eclipses is that they tell us, they're a clue that reality is different than it normally is. And this is my fundamental way of understanding the nodes, is that wherever they are in the chart, they show us the kind of changes in the settled reality that maybe had been ongoing before the nodes arrived. The nodes kind of lift the veil of reality, show us the undergirdment or the programming language, let's say, of that reality as the nodes do their work. It's kind of like in the Matrix, those operators on the ship. I think the character's name was Tank in the first Matrix, and his brother, but they could see the digital screens and then they could see pictures. And so the nodes are kind of like making reality a little digitized, or glitches in the matrix. I like that phrase too when you start thinking about the nodes, the glitch in the matrix. You know, there's a scene where Neo, the cat, repeats itself. And it's like, wait, what's going on here? I just noticed something strange. That's a little trippy. And then that can mean there's been some alterations happening in the Matrix in the movie. That's what that means. Same with eclipses. It says, okay, whoa, what's going on? There's something I'm not seeing, or something that I need to see. that these eclipses are indicative of. So that's my understanding. I'm going to lead with those themes right here, right out of the gate. But let's go to the next book I want to look at, and this is Camilla Sutton, The Lunar Nodes, Crisis and Redemption. I really like this book. She says here, introducing Rahu and Ketu, they are the karmic axis of our lives, the invisible link between past lives and the psychological dilemmas of the present. They present the hidden side of human nature, our psychological characters, the interplay of the shadows within us, both good and bad, our fears, sorrows, unfulfilled desires, doubts, unhappiness, strengths, and weaknesses. A connection that has been established between the practicalities of life and the deep mysteries of our past. The themes that she's highlighting here, the idea of the hidden side of human nature, again, glitch in the matrix, the kind of truth that gets uncovered that we normally don't think about, the interplay of the shadows within us, right? The sense of, what am I? Are we just like a ghost in a machine, or is there a soul being projected from somewhere else? These kind of questions of what is the fundamental nature of our reality and who are we, and the hidden sides of that then get exposed. So I think this a part of her book is hitting in that and tapping into that. Then she goes on to continue, what are Rahu and Ketu? Rahu Ketu is the Sanskrit name given collectively to the nodes of the moon. Rahu is the north node, Ketu is the south node. And so you may see astrologers refer to Rahu or Ketu, they're referring to the north node and south node. These are the names in Sanskrit. And so when the moon is moving from the south to the north and it intersects the ecliptic, that's Rahu, right? When the moon's path is rising up to go above the ecliptic, this is the ascending node or the increasing node. And when the moon's path goes below the ecliptic, the moon is decreasing or going under the ecliptic. That's Ketu, or the decreasing node or descending node, south node. And then she does relate it to eclipses here. When the moon intersects the apparent path of the sun, it disturbs the electromagnetic field, and this can create eclipses, which are considered full of occult significance. So that's what I was doing earlier when I was talking about eclipses. So that's some of Camilla Sutton's notions about the nodes. I think they match where I was going earlier. Two more texts from the ancient world that I want to look at. There's not much written in ancient astrology about the nodes, but these two maybe are standout passages. Vedius Phalans from the Raleigh translation was very kind of down on the nodes, warning about them. He says that if one finds someone beginning some matter while the moon is passing through the ecliptic places, those are the nodal points, he can forecast that that matter will be incomplete, regretted, and subject to penalties. So his notion is that when the moon is angular to those nodes, he says it here higher up in this passage, if the moon is passing through the current position of the ascending node or through the points in square or opposition, particularly if it is at the same degree position, beware of starting anything. So he's talking about exact conjunctions to the either north node or south node, or to the north bending and south bending. Those are the points that are exactly square the lunar nodes. North bending is the point after the moon ascends and it's above the ecliptic, and then it hits at its highest point. That's the north bending. It's exactly square the nodes. The south bending is when the moon has descended below the ecliptic and it's at its lowest point and then starts moving. Right? South is the low point. Bending is to start turning higher. It's that exact square to the nodes. So, but the notion here is the same, right? What is an eclipse? The sun gets blocked. It gets eaten up and it becomes dark. And so while Valens is quite negative here in this warning, my sense is that things just become strange and odd. Remember what I said earlier, the normal flow gets interrupted. And so you can choose to start something during the eclipses or when the nodes are operative, but you might break the normal flow of expectation. And that's why it's sort of suggested to not engage the nodes directly if we're trying to do an election. And I practice that way for sure. They're inevitable though, and so we have to interface with this energy. And the way I've always recommended, is more spirituality, going inward, prayer, supplication to the divine, when those nodes get exactly involved in our charts, in our lives, or during eclipses. Okay, and then the final textual nodal text I want to bring in is also from the ancient tradition, and this is from an astrologer, Hephaestion of Thebes. He's got a book called the Apotalismatics, I think is how you say that. It's about inceptional astrology. This one is the Gramalia translation. In it, he just is very clear. When the moon is full, additive in longitude and latitude on the ascending node, the buyer in the market will pay a higher price. But when the moon is waning, subtractive in numbers, and on the descending node, the buyer will pay a smaller price. For thus speaks Dorotheus, and then he goes to quote Dorotheus. You find this also in Dorotheus. The notion is that the north node increases and the south node decreases. That's another way a lot of people like to look at the nodes, that when the north node gets involved, you're going to increase things. I still think we have to bring in the idea of a kind of corruption from increase. It's an increase that's unstable, that changes the normal flow of life. You know, maybe we have an appetite that's too great, and so we lose our sense of a core self, getting lost in ambition. These are the kind of things that you might think about corruption via increase. And then, or destabilization. South node, when you decrease things, I've likened this often to the idea that we lose interest in our attachments with the material world. So I might become dissatisfied with, like, you know, you buy a new watch or something and then you get it, you wear it, and you're like, this sucks. And then my dissatisfaction returns. There's a kind of breakdown in our attachments to the materiality that the south node can bring, and then we're forced inward. We're forced to go deeply into existential questions. What does life even mean? Why is there suffering in life? You know, what is the purpose here? Why do bad things happen to good people? These kind of contemplations that can sort of, you know, make us dispassionate a little bit from what's happening around us, but then force us to find deeper footing spiritually to keep going in this incarnation. So this Ketu, you find, or the south node, is often likened to asceticism or ascetic practice. Wherever it is in your chart, you might bring a certain asceticism or a certain inward turn to those themes, or if it's on a specific planet. That's how I would delineate it. But so there you go. This is the textual examination.